Hello. Okay. Can I start? Can I start? Yes? Okay. Thank you. Welcome, everybody, to the third annual Ken Wallston Memorial Lecture. This lecture started a few years ago after the death of Ken Wallston. Ken was one of our devoted founding members of the Brevard Jewish community, and as a tribute to him, we thought it would be nice to set up a lecture fund and have a lecture every year, and people very generously contributed to it. So we've been able to do it, and we'll continue to do it every year. And we're very fortunate to have a really distinguished guest this afternoon, who will be introduced in a minute. But before that, I wanted to ask Margot Wallston to come up and just say a few words about her father before we begin.
Thank you, Howard. My name's Margot Wallston. I'm Ken Wallston's daughter. And I first also want to recognize Ken's wife, Jonathan Jabot, in the audience. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for both of them. So I live up in Asheville, and I want to say we've been pretty distracted this last several weeks. And so I'm so grateful that we have such a large number in attendance, and who knows who's out there on YouTube. So I apologize if my words don't come out the way I planned for them to. But for anyone who did not know my father, I brought this picture that I really love of him. This is looking his best. And he received so much joy and camaraderie and community in the Brevard Jewish community. And it really made the Brevard Jewish community an important, can you guys see him if I put him right here? Okay. It made the Brevard Jewish community a really important part of my community as well, even though I don't get down to Brevard as much as I would like and participate as often as I would like. But my father actually passed away a week from today, 4 years ago. So this is very timely that this lecture is happening today. And one of his goals when he was with the Brevard Jewish community was to have more. He was an intellectual person, and he was a scholar of his own in health psychology. He was also not only a founding member of the Brevard Jewish community, but he was a founding father of the field of health psychology. And so he spent how many years? 45 years at Vanderbilt, like my whole life. Some long number, maybe not that long, 35, something like that. But anyway, teaching at Vanderbilt University, and he loved to have conversation and discussion, and so he really wanted to bring the different communities, faith-based communities of Brevard together to learn and to bring in outside opinions and ideas and to be able to have discussion and dialogue. And so he wasn't able to do a lot of that before he passed away, but he got the ball rolling. And then after he passed, I just think this is such a wonderful way to honor him and his legacy and to keep this tradition going. And so I'm just really grateful that he can be here present with us still. And I am really grateful to Howard for making sure that this happens every year, and to all of you for showing up. So thank you so much.
Our first lecture was Professor Ellen Davis from Duke University, who spoke about religion. And then we had Professor Portnoy from the YIVO came last year and talked about Yiddish. And this year we're going to hear about another important subject, obviously, the Holocaust in Israel. So to introduce our speaker, I'm going to ask someone who knows her pretty well, her father. This is something I don't know how often you get to introduce your daughter in an academic way, but it's a unique thing. So I'm sure he's never done it before, have you? No. So let's see how it happens. Our Vice President, Jerry Mandel, who is also a Professor Emeritus of of Literature at Tel Aviv University.
Thank you, Howard. Before I begin introducing our speaker for today, may I ask you all, please, to silence your phones. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My spell checker wants me to change ladies to women or people, but you all know what I mean. Thank you. The annual Ken Wallston Lecture honors the memory of a long-standing and very wise member of the Brevard Jewish community. I'm delighted that his wife Jonatha and daughter Margot have been able to join us here this afternoon. The Wallston Lecture highlights matters of general intellectual inquiry, mirroring Ken Wallston's own vast intellectual interests and generous spirit. To that end, we are delighted to have with us today Professor Naomi Mandel from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Professor Mandel was born in the United States and educated at both Tel Aviv University and the University of California at Irvine. She admits to being raised by a modernist and a medievalist in a home where the Norton anthology was always open and coffee-stained. In spite of these fundamentally stabilizing influences, she asserted her independence by pursuing first a career as a concert pianist and later by specializing in contemporary literature, critical theory, popular culture, and film. She was professor of English and film media at the University of Rhode Island for 20 years prior to joining the Hebrew University, where she now holds the Anne and Joseph Edelman Chair in American Literature. She is the author of Against the Unspeakable, Complicity, the Holocaust, and Slavery in America. Think about it. Her other major book, Disappear Here, Violence After Generation X. Her essays on American slavery, the Holocaust, and the terror attacks of September 11th, 2001 have appeared in a variety of journals on both sides of the Atlantic, and she has spoken on these and other topics in the United States and throughout Europe. Her talk to us today is titled The Holocaust in Israeli Culture. Professor Mandel.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to start by thanking the Wallston family for their generous funding of this vibrant lecture series, and Howard Rock, president of the Brevard Jewish community, for inviting me to participate. Thanks also to Reverend Bob of the Unitarian Universalists of Transylvania County for making this venue available, and to Doug, who's working tirelessly behind the scenes to turn my amateurish PowerPoint into a spectacular presentation. Now let's see how well it works. And not too well. How do I get this to advance? All right. Talking about the Holocaust in Israel is like trying to describe the air. It's everywhere, but you can only see it if something is very wrong. Jewish Israelis grow up in a culture saturated with Holocaust awareness, anxiety, and stress. As a result, in Israel, there's no knowledge gap between descendants of Holocaust survivors and other people the same age. In Israel, the Holocaust pervades the environment, and to be Israeli is, in a very cultural, if not a literal sense, to be a Holocaust survivor. The image of the nation of Israel as a phoenix arising from the ashes of Auschwitz is widely shared both in Israel and abroad. For example, it is practically mandatory for state visitors to Israel to visit Yad Vashem, the Israel Holocaust Museum, as part of their duties. This custom cements the association of Israel with the Holocaust and establishes Israel as the official representative of its victims. But the relationship between the state of Israel and the genocide of Jews in Nazi-occupied Germany is a complex and evolving one. In this talk, I'll discuss the ways historical events, cultural attitudes, and national policy impact and shape Holocaust awareness in Israel from before the founding of the state until the tragic events of October 7, 2023. The Holocaust did not emerge from a vacuum. Centuries of anti-Semitism preceded the Third Reich, and the state of Israel did not emerge from a vacuum either. The modern Zionist movement, the idea that Jews belong in their ancestral homeland of Eretz Yisrael, emerged well before the founding of the state in 1947. Starting in the 1880s, several waves of immigration, several waves of immigrants, or olim, already joined the existing Jewish communities, or yishuv, in what was then called Palestine. Now, it's time for a quick Hebrew lesson. Don't worry, there will be a test. The first word, yishuv, means, in Hebrew means settlement. The yishuv refers to Jews who were settled in Palestine before the state. Within the yishuv, we distinguish between the old yishuv and the new yishuv. Old yishuv refers to Jews who had been living in the country for centuries, in Tiberias, Hebron, Tzfat, and Jerusalem. The new yishuv refers to immigrants to Israel starting in the late 19th century. This new yishuv was the product of aliyah. Aliyah, our second Hebrew word, means ascent. And in Hebrew, aliyah refers to immigration or travel to the Holy Land. Geography is ideology, as you can see in this famous 16th century map, which situates the holy city of Jerusalem in the center of the cloverleaf continents. The Hebrew language reflects this idea. In Hebrew, one ascends from the rest of the world to the land of Israel. And within Israel, when you travel to Jerusalem, you say, I'm going up to Jerusalem. The Hebrew language thus underscores the idea that Israel is on a higher plane than the diaspora. The diaspora is a kind of fallen condition. In this way, the language itself will impact the attitude towards Holocaust survivors who made aliyah, that is, who ascended to Israel after the Holocaust. The Holocaust survivors joined the old yishuv and the new yishuv of Jews already living in the country. So who were these communities? The first yishuv, that is, the Jewish communities in Palestine under Ottoman rule, were primarily religious Jews who depended on charity for financial support. The new yishuv was largely secular, not religious. They were inspired by socialism and emphasized labor and self-sufficiency. These are the people who established the kibbutz, the experience of collective egalitarian living. These early pioneers identified as the new Jew, physically strong and collectively organized. In the next slide, we're going to watch a comedy sketch about the waves of immigration, or aliyah, to Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And I'm just going to say it's got a lot of stereotypes, but we'll talk about those. As you watch this sketch, ask yourself, where are the Holocaust survivors? Can we play it, please? I don't think we have any sound. No sound? Okay. Believe it or not, it's funnier with sound. So, where are the Holocaust survivors? They are absent. And this sketch conveys several important points that will help us understand why. Oh, what happened? What's this? Yeah, thank you. The settlers of the New Yishuv chose a hard life under Turkish and then British rule, a life of austerity, of perpetual struggle and violence. Many people couldn't handle it and returned to Europe. So even before Hitler's rise to power, there is a perception in the Yishuv that the strong nationalistic settlers built the state, and the weaklings live in the diaspora. Remember, the New Yishuv was influenced by socialism. For these people, the collective enterprise of creating the new state was more important than personal experience. As David Ben-Gurion himself puts it, the destiny of the state is in the hands of the many rather than of the single individual. Holocaust survivors' personal experiences were seen as far less important than national destiny. For the new state, the cultural specifics of the diaspora should give way to a new national identity. But as we all know, the melting pot ideology has its limits, and tensions and stereotypes persisted. I'm giving you this information so that you understand why, after the war, when Holocaust survivors came to Israel, no one wanted to hear their stories. In the 1940s and 1950s, it was considered somewhat shameful to be a Holocaust survivor. The unspoken questions were, what were you doing in Europe in the first place? Remember, Aliyah, ascent, puts Israel on a higher plane than the diaspora, which is a kind of fallen condition. Another question, can you hack it in this difficult and austere environment? Remember, the true horrors of the war had not yet been fully politicized. We can see these attitudes at work in this poster from 1948. An Israeli soldier, the new Jew, is contrasted with a much smaller photograph of European Jews expelled from their homes. The caption reads, "Behind us, slavery and degeneration. Ahead of us, sovereignty and independence. That is the battle." Slavery and degeneration, that's life in the diaspora. In November 1947, the United States General Assembly votes for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, which was then controlled by Britain. With the news of the declaration, Jews danced in the streets with joy. The day after British rule over Palestine ended, Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, and Iraq invaded. Despite being massively outnumbered and outgunned, the nascent Jewish state wins the war in May 1948. This is known in the Arab world as the Nakba, the disaster, both because Jewish infidels now control Muslim holy sites and because of the displacement of a large percent of the local Arab population. In the 50s and 60s, the population of Israel was comprised of three main groups: Yishuv members, Holocaust survivors, and immigrants from Arab and Muslim countries. Early attitudes towards the Holocaust in Israeli Jewish society emerged through the meeting of these three groups. The Yishuv members were primarily Ashkenazi, Jews of European origin. As we've seen, they tended to look down on new arrivals. These were people who had been in the country for decades, if not generations. They were well established politically and financially. Holocaust survivors were also, of course, of European origin. They received significant material aid from the state, but were generally discouraged from talking about their experiences. Jews from Middle Eastern countries are not Ashkenazi. They are known as, I skipped the Mizrahim? Yes, thank you. They were known as Mizrahim, Easterners, and in appearance and dress, they were not dissimilar to the Arabs with whom Israel had just fought a bloody war for independence. As a result, they faced particular challenges and considerable prejudice in integrating into Israeli society, which at the time was predominantly Ashkenazi. Because the Holocaust happened in Europe, the memory of the Holocaust tended to be exclusionary of non-Ashkenazi Jews, especially Jews from Sephardic or Middle Eastern origin. In this way, the memory of the Holocaust contributed to the marginalization of the Mizrahim, the non-Ashkenazi Jews. Remember how I said that in Hebrew geography is politicized? The national memory of the Holocaust in Israel politicizes time as well. Since 1951, the National Holocaust and Heroism Day is celebrated in the spring, on the 27th of the Hebrew month of Nisan. Why that day? Why that date? Because it corresponds with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and contributes to the significance of physical and military resistance in Israel's memory of the Holocaust at the time. Fallen Soldiers Memorial Day is observed 1 week after Holocaust and Heroism Day. Why a week? This stems from the Shiv'ah, the traditional Jewish 7 days of mourning. Memorial Day is then immediately followed by Independence Day. This creates a mythic order, a cycle of death and regeneration that Israelis are exposed to every year. I said that many of the Holocaust survivors and refugees were reluctant to talk about their experiences and were generally discouraged from doing so. The big exception is Yechiel Dinur, who wrote under the pen name Katsetnik 135633. The number is the tattoo burned in his arm. His books were virtually the only reference to the Holocaust in Israeli literature in the 1950s. Katsetnik coined the term Planet Auschwitz, and his books contributed to the imagination of the Holocaust as a demonic, otherworldly terrain in which ordinary Jews are rendered helpless by the depravity of their Nazi oppressors. This is a world of innocent victims and demonic perpetrators, a world in which the distinction between evil and virtue, black and white, Nazi and Jew, are crystal clear. But this image of the Holocaust as Planet Auschwitz began to change in the 1960s, which saw some watershed moments in Israeli history, the Eichmann trial and the Six-Day War. The Eichmann trial was broadcast on radio and television across the country, and Israelis followed it with great interest. Testimony given by the survivors were also published daily in the newspapers. You couldn't miss what was going on. Approximately 110 people testified, bringing the true horrors of the war to the general public. Holocaust survivors were revealed to be a multifaceted group whose members had different opinions, perceptions, and perspectives on the past and the present. These were hardly innocent, ignorant victims to be pitied. They were strong and capable people grappling with an unprecedented situation. Their stories led to new realizations about the complexity of the Jewish predicament during the Holocaust, the difficulties of resistance, the inability to grasp the Nazis' techniques of lies and deception, and the confusion about the nature of the camps. This same year, 1961, the term concentration camp syndrome was coined by Leo Ettinger. This medical term granted a kind of legitimacy to what clinical psychologists were beginning to recognize as the long-term and far-reaching traumatic impacts of the Holocaust on the survivors. After the trial, the Ministry of Education expanded the scope of the school curriculum on the Holocaust, and the history of the Jewish diaspora began appearing in a slightly more complex manner in Israeli culture. Diaspora was not a fallen condition, the province of weaklings led like lambs to the slaughter, but a rich and varied set of communities who were targeted by the genocidal Nazi state. If the Eichmann trial changed the perception of Holocaust victims, the Six-Day War required that Israel society revisit the perception of the perpetrators. In the weeks before the war broke out, extreme propagandistic rhetoric promised the destruction of Israel and its citizens. This incitement was taken at face value by many Israelis. The weeks before the war saw the digging of trenches, both for defense and in the expectation of mass burial. But instead, as a result of the 1967 war, Israel occupied the West Bank and eastern Jerusalem, formerly held by Jordan, and some Israeli soldiers and citizens identified directly with the people they were displacing. As Menachem Shelah, a survivor of the Holocaust who fought in the Six-Day War, puts it, I felt uneasy about being part of a victorious army, a strong army. When I was going up the Jericho Road and the refugees were going down it, I identified directly with them. When I saw parents dragging their children along by the hand, I actually almost saw myself being dragged along by my own father. We are missing a slide here, but that's okay. Go back then. Never mind. Okay, so if in Planet Auschwitz the distinction between the victims and the perpetrators is crystal clear, now, after the 1967 war, the nation of the persecuted has become an occupying force. The moral distinction between victims and perpetrators begins to be a little blurry. We can see the effect of this blurring in the 1970 poem by Holocaust survivor Dan Pagis. The title of the poem is Written in Pencil in the Sealed Railway Car. By evoking the imagery of Jews deported to their death in sealed cars, the title announces its association with the Holocaust. So I'll read the poem. Here in this carload, I am Eve with Abel my son. If you see my other son, Cain, son of man, tell him that This poem is a message, and because it's a message in a sealed car, it's a message no one will read. But the message isn't really a message, tell him that I what? It's a message that can't be spoken. And because it's written in ephemeral pencil and the railway car is sealed, it's a message that will never be delivered. But it's an important and urgent message nonetheless, and the names of the characters, Eve, Cain, and Abel, suggest that this is a universal message, a message to humanity, a humanity that includes Cain, the first murder, as well as Abel, the first victim. The poem attests both to the destruction of humanity by the horrors of where that sealed railway car is headed, and to the urgent need to speak the unspeakable, to recognize the essential humanity of the perpetrators, and to rebuild the human community. In the 1980s, with the Lebanon War of 1982 and the Palestinian Intifada of 1987, the function of the Holocaust in Israeli culture evolved even further. Public opinion on these events was divisive, and this lack of consensus was paralleled by fragmented opinions on a range of religious, economic, and social issues. In 1988, the singer and songwriter Si Heyman released a protest song about the Intifada. The title phrase, shooting and crying, has come to concretize the moral dilemma of Israeli soldiers when faced by the Palestinian population. This song was banned from being broadcast on Galei Tzahal, the army radio, in part because of this verse, which seems to equate the Palestinian with Jewish victims of the Holocaust. Can we play it? Do we have the... No? Okay, then I'll just read it. Shooting and crying, burning and laughing. Actually, I can't read it. I'm sorry. When did we learn how to bury people alive? Shooting and crying, burning and laughing. When did we forget that our children, too, were once murdered? The 1980s also saw an important development in Israeli Holocaust education, the organization of travel to Poland for Israeli high school students. Students visit the Warsaw Ghetto and other sites associated with the destruction of the Jewish community. The climax of the visit is the commemorative ceremony at Auschwitz, the March of the Living. Here, Israeli students are joined by Jewish students from the diaspora, Israeli officials, and leaders of Jewish organizations and Jewish communities. They march together the few kilometers from Auschwitz to Birkenau. The anticipation and effect of this high school trip is satirized by Rutu Modan in her 2013 graphic novel, The Property. The boisterous kids on the flight from Tel Aviv to Warsaw, are contrasted by the tearful, thoughtful young people on the return flight from Warsaw to Tel Aviv. Finally, the 1980s saw the release of Yehuda Poliker's album Ashes and Dust. This is arguably one of the most influential Israeli music albums ever recorded, and it received exceptional commercial success and critical appreciation. This album marks a number of shifts in the role of the Holocaust in Israeli culture. First, it changes the idea of who gets to be a valid storyteller of Holocaust survivors, of Holocaust survival. Not only survivors can tell their story, but their children, too, are valid storytellers. In addition, this album marks a shift from a focus on the Holocaust as a historical event to the memory of the Holocaust and the reverberations of this memory in individuals and their family. Finally, because Poliker is the son of Holocaust survivors from Thessaloniki, he brought instruments and rhythms from the Greek tradition into Israeli music. In this way, his album helped challenge Zionistic Ashkenazi hegemony over Holocaust memory and brought non-Ashkenazi Jews into the community impacted by the Holocaust. Okay, I think I need to be here. Not yet. Doug, what's the next slide? Is it the song or? No, I want the slide. Can you go forward by one slide? There, that's the slide I was looking for. Thank you. And then the next slide is the song? Thank you. Okay. In Israel, on Holocaust and Heroism Day and on Memorial for Fallen Soldiers Day, the local radio stations tend to air only solemn Hebrew songs. In the 1980s and 1990s, with the surge of terror attacks as part of the First and Second Intifada, it became customary for all radio stations to switch the broadcasting to somber songs from the Holocaust and Remembrance Day repertoire. And Poliker's songs from Ashes and Dust play a prominent role in these broadcasts. In other words, when in the 80s and 90s, when there would be a terror attack, all of the national radio stations would start to play sad music. And they would play sad music like Poliker's song, Ashes and Dust. Can we hear it now? I guess not. Okay. This is Poliker singing this song in the March of the Living. Okay, so this cements the Holocaust's, the song's association with the Holocaust. And if you imagine, the fact that this Holocaust song is played after a Palestinian terror attack, you can see how popular music begins to serve an ideological function, wielding the Holocaust to articulate the stakes of the Israeli-Arab conflict. The cumulative results of these educational efforts and public discourse was that Israeli youth in the 1980s expressed a much greater sense of identification with the victims of the Holocaust than the previous generations. Okay, Doug, we can just go to the next slide. Thank you. So far, we've seen how the early skepticism towards Holocaust survivors in the 40s and 50s evolved to the integration of their stories into the nation's collective memory. In complex and multifaceted ways, the Holocaust serves a crucial function in Israeli culture, and it's essential to understanding not only the foundation of the Israeli state, but also its ongoing struggles and conflicts. And that includes the tragic events of October 7th, 2023. In the morning of that day, Hamas fighters, followed by Gazan civilians, invaded Israeli territory. This was the first such invasion since the War of Independence. They attacked military bases, civilian communities, and a music festival, killing about 1,200 people and kidnapping 250, including children, who were taken as hostages to Gaza. In addition to the summary killings and other war crimes committed on the ground, over 8,500 rockets were launched into Israeli populated centers on that day. Israel is a tiny country. Everybody knows someone who was killed or captured in the October 7th attacks. The massacre was by far the deadliest per capita terror attack worldwide. 1 per every 10,000 Israelis was killed. As President Biden put it, it's as if 40,000 or 50,000 Americans had died on 9/11. This metric adds context for the national impact of the attack and the sense of loss for Israel's civilians. Interestingly, the initial responses to the massacre conceived of it in terms of a pogrom. The word pogrom literally means destruction. The term refers to an organized massacre specifically against Jewish people. There have, of course, been many pogroms in Jewish history, but the Kishinev pogrom is especially relevant in this context. It incited a wave of immigration to Palestine and inspired the ideology of Jewish self-defense. Chaim Nachman Bialik's poem, The City of Slaughter, about the Kishinev pogrom, is taught in Israeli schools, and I'll read just a part of it. Arise and go now to the city of slaughter. Into its courtyard wind thy way. There, with thine own hand touch, and behold on tree, on stone, on fence, on mural clay, the spattered blood and dried brains of the dead. For God called up the slaughter and the spring together. The slayer slew, the blossom burst, and it was sunny weather. Everyone in Israel knows these words. And the poem powerfully reverberated with the Israeli public when confronted with images of the destruction on October 7th. Now, why refer to October 7th as a pogrom? Referring to the October 7th massacre as a pogrom does a number of things. It underscores the helplessness of the victims and the trauma of the population. And as we've seen, the Kishinev pogrom in particular is important to the history of Zionism. As we can see from this cartoon, 99,700,000, approximately the number of the inhabitants of Israel, are traumatized by the Hamas pogrom. No, we're missing some slides. Let's go. I can't go further. They had a lot of work to do with my PowerPoint. They worked diligently for an hour and a half, and it is my fault for not sending it earlier. Okay. As the war in Gaza commenced, the Holocaust began to replace pogrom as the major paradigm through which the October 7th massacre is understood. Why? Again, why? Well, one of the reasons is that it's a way to counter the global response to the attacks, in which Hamas is described as freedom fighters. International bodies refuse to acknowledge the rape and sexual torture of women, and Israeli military action in Gaza was condemned as genocide. In response, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett frames and explains Israeli military action against Hamas in Gaza as fighting Nazis, and Israel's ambassador to the UN dons a yellow star when addressing the Security Council. In this cartoon, we can see the October 7th massacre explicitly linked with the cultural memory and national memorialization of the Holocaust. Remember those trips to Poland that started in the 1980s? Here, in this cartoon, the teacher informs the class that the annual trip to Poland will take place instead at Kibbutz Be'eri, which was decimated by the October 7th attack. Referring to the October 7th massacre in terms borrowed from the Holocaust does a number of things. First, it highlights the sheer magnitude of the massacre. The October 7th massacre was the largest mass killing of Jews since the Holocaust, so imagery and terminology for mass destruction that had developed in the wake of the Holocaust naturally migrated to these events. Second, it reflects the terminology of the survivors of the massacre, who, having grown up on Holocaust imagery, evoked it to create their experience. Here, Hadar Sharvit, describing her experience of October 7th, uses the term Holocaust-like. Third, it enables Israeli politicians and spokespeople to present the October 7th massacre as the deliberate and concerted action of a state-like entity, not a spontaneous eruption of violence. It frames Hamas's actions as genocidal, justifying the scale and intensity of Israel's military response. We're fighting Nazis, as Naftali Bennett put it. Now I wanted the slide with the tattoos, if you could get that for me, Doug. Thank you. But on a purely personal level, the Holocaust provided the Israeli public a context through which to understand and process their trauma and loss. Here we can see how one survivor elected to have the date October 7th, 2023, tattooed on his arm in a clear reference to the identification tattoos of Holocaust survivors. So in conclusion, the Holocaust has left an indelible mark on Israeli society, influencing not only its national identity, but also its cultural and historical consciousness. The framing of the Holocaust in national memory provides a lens through which the nation and the people process trauma, navigate global perceptions, and view themselves and their position both in the nation and in world history. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take some questions. Hi, yeah.
One of your slides that you put over near the very end showed what I thought was people in Israel protesting the response to was I not?
No, I had a slide of people in Israel protesting the massacres of Sabra and Shatila in the 1980s. Yeah. I didn't have an image here of the Israeli protest movement against the war, but I'm happy to talk about that a little if you want. So, so there's been there wasn't a lot of protest early on because of the sense of urgency that people felt to rescue the hostages. And there was a firm belief that the Israel Defense Force would be able to go in and do their magic and go into Gaza and get the hostages back. The extent of the Hamas tunnels and the extent to which Hamas was willing to use the citizens of Gaza as human shields was not fully known, and honestly, I think that there was a little bit of vindictiveness there too. But as the war continued, people did start to speak out against the continuation of the war, and that it tended to take the form of a criticism of Netanyahu. The idea within the Israeli left is that Netanyahu wants this war. He is being driven towards it by the crazy people in his government, like Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir, thank you, who I think I heard just today, took a bunch of people to northern Gaza and said, stake out where you're going to have your new homes. I mean, now these people are crazy. They're in the government. They're not making decisions about the war. But Netanyahu needs them to be on his side in order to continue to be in power. And so there was a sense that Netanyahu was choosing his own power over the kinds of negotiations that would be necessary to return the hostage. And that's when the Families Forum movement that was initially we're behind the Kidnapped Families Forum movement, They initially said, we are behind the government. We do not distinguish between civilians and military hostages. Everybody is ours. Everybody has to return. This is not political. This is just a basic thing. And it took them almost a year to turn against the government. Now they're pretty much joining the perpetual demonstrations against the attack on the Supreme Court and civil rights that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are leading. So yeah. So I guess my point is that the movement against the anti-war movement is also an anti-Netanyahu movement, and not everybody is against Netanyahu. Half of the country is like Netanyahu is doing just fine. So it's so that kind of limits the extent to which people can mobilize and protest. Yeah,
How many hostages are still there?
101.
101. And do you know, are they children or adults? Or
Some of them are children. Some of them are old people.
where are they usually held?
I think the sense is that they're held deep in the tunnels. In tunnels? The tunnels that Hamas built underneath Gaza to enable Hamas to move around and be protected, while the civilians of Gaza are being bombed. I think some hostages who've returned describe being held in Gaza City itself on the surface. But then when there was a sense that the Israeli government, that the Israeli army was getting too close, they'd be put down into a tunnel, a place where you can't stand up straight, no air. There's not enough air circulation down there. There's not enough oxygen there. It's no running water, obviously, no functional toilets. It's not an especially salubrious place to spend over a year. Yeah. But it's difficult for Israeli soldiers to get to them. The 6 hostages that were found recently killed were killed because, the thinking goes, their Palestinian captors were told, if the Israeli government gets close, kill the hostages and then run away. So the hostages were worth more to the Palestinians as dead bodies than as a living triumph of the Israeli military. Yeah.
At one point, they had talked about the fact that they knew about the planning of this horrible pogrom, and that very quickly got quashed. We didn't hear very much more about it, other than maybe a day or so in the news. Is it the same in Israel?
What do you mean they knew about the plan?
That Israeli intelligence have been told on more than one occasion about the town that actually was a model of the...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about now. Yes, yes, it's coming out now that there had been many warnings that Hamas is planning something. A lot of these warnings came from the girls who were, the primarily female units, army units, who were situated on the southern, on the separation wall between Israel and Gaza. And they said, hey, something's happening. We see all this stuff. And they were basically told to sit down and shut up. The men have this in control. You're just girls. And so there's a general sense that they that they were thrown to the sharks. And also the vaunted cyber unit 8200 also sent warnings, and these were also dismissed. There was a general sense that the unrest is going to start in the Palestinian territories, and a lot of soldiers at just that time were diverted away from the fence with Gaza towards the territories. I can't choose.
Yes, has there been any clarification on the government's very slow response on the day of the attacks?
Not that I know of. No.
Has the colonel who told the female soldiers who were doing the watching, the vigilating, has that colonel been dismissed or reprimanded or removed? Do we know
I don't
anything?
know the details. Let me remind you that I'm here to talk about the Holocaust and Israeli culture and not the events of October 7th. So I don't want to misspeak. I think some people have stepped down. Some people have lost their jobs. Not enough people. Yeah. The anti-war demonstrations have the, you know, one of the slogans is, "You're in charge." You're the head of the country. You're in charge. You're responsible. Meaning that Netanyahu should step down.
Does it, the Holocaust pervade all parts of Israeli life? Like when children grow up and it's taught, I assume it's taught in schools in depth.
Yeah.
So do they see the world in terms of the Holocaust rather than another paradigm? When something happens like October 7th, it's the parallel they use is the Holocaust rather than something else that might, if it happened in the United States, it wouldn't be seen that way, perhaps. That everyone sees the world in terms of the Holocaust when something happens.
Well, yeah, I think I talked about why the Holocaust made sense as a paradigm in terms of the very high per capita killing rate and the fact that it was the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and because it made a lot of sense to think of it, you know, and to think of it in terms of the imagery and information about the Holocaust that people had grown up with. So I don't know of any other paradigm that would apply.
Well, I was thinking in 9/11, that wasn't used. It was more about the, ISIS and the whole Islamic ideology and things like that became the issues rather than the Nazis. Now, it's true, Putin, when he went into Ukraine, called them Nazis,
Yeah.
which was interesting. So some people do use that paradigm so for all sorts of bad things and false things. But there are many paradigms, and
Right.
but in Israel, that's perhaps the only paradigm that's used.
Well, for an event like this, for a massacre like this, it's not the only paradigm that's used. It's not a paradigm that's used talking about crime. It's not a paradigm that's used talking about civil rights. It's not a paradigm that's used talking about the role of women in society. It's not a paradigm that's used talking about religion, which is an important element of and contentious element of Israeli life. But for the massacre of October 7th, it quickly became a strong paradigm, although I think the reason that it replaced pogrom was more political, more for political expediency rather than emotional resonance.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah. Other questions? There's one.
Just a question about anti-Semitism in the United States. Do you see that as a shift leftward by any chance?
Look, anti-Semitism has never been the sole province of the right. Anti-Semitism was a province of the left in the 1930s. Communism, profoundly anti-Semitic. So I don't think that, I think there is definitely, I think the American left is certainly, identifying with the Palestinian cause, and some of that identification takes the form of anti-Semitism. I think that, if you've been demonizing a people for 2,000 years, and then it was not cool to do it for 50 or 60 years, it's gonna come back really quickly. But I think that both the right and the left can be profoundly anti-Semitic. And it's been that way throughout history.
I have a question that is perhaps tangential, but since you're up there and you're an Israeli American, I have to ask you, what is your thinking about the location of that kibbutz, butt up against the hostile population? Was there any wisdom involved in choosing that selection and choosing that location? Or would it have been wiser to have left a buffer, 10, 15, 20 miles that they would have had to traverse before they could have gotten into that kibbutz?
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, Israel occupied the area around Gaza City and withdrew from that area in 2008, unilaterally withdrew. And these towns that were targeted by Hamas were where they withdrew to, okay? Now, Israel's a tiny country, 15, 20 miles, you're practically at the Jordan border, okay? And also there's a sense that it's hard not to live on a border in Israel. It's not like in this country where you can, just retreat 15, 20 miles and everything will be okay. There's not that much space. What they did is the thinking was, I think, after Israel retreated unilaterally from Gaza in 2008, that we will build this fence and we will invest in military presence and the Iron Dome system to shoot down any rockets. And we will make those really, really good to keep our people safe. And they invested in fences, and they dug the fences deeper when Hamas began tunneling under them. They invested in the Iron Dome system and were able to shoot down most rockets before they hit the neighborhoods. And they had a major army presence, and they were like, okay, this is it. We are not comfortable neighbors, but I think a lot of Israelis felt that we want to live in peace, and we are sure that the citizens of Gaza want to live in peace as well. So we'll just live next to each other. We won't interact with each other. We'll protect ourselves, and eventually we'll be able to forge a more sustainable reality. But Hamas used that as an opportunity. The people in Gaza may very well want peace. I believe they do. It's important for me as an Israeli to believe that Palestinians love their children and want a better future for their children and want to live in peace with their neighbors, just like Jews do. But Hamas is different. Hamas is not the same as any Palestinian. They are a genocidal terror group, and they want to destroy the state of Israel and return the holy sites to Muslim-controlled hands, as they had been in Muslim-controlled hands since, for the hundreds of years in the Ottoman Empire. For them, Israel's just an uncomfortable blip that, can easily be gotten rid of.
Well, I think on that note, it's probably a good time to...
On that cheerful note.
No, well, it's not so uncheerful. I thought your comments that all people really want to live together, at least live their lives and give them a space to live in.
I think so.
Very helpful. Thank you so much for your...
Thank you,
input.
everybody. Thank you.
I forgot to thank the Unitarian Church for allowing us to use this site, so I want to very much thank them as well. Very nice.
And it's my fault that the clips didn't have sound. It is not their fault. They worked very hard.
And I'm sure Naomi will stick around for a few minutes to answer your own personal questions if
Certainly.
you'd like to ask her personally.